Hello, beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep, all while deepening in your connection with your beautiful team of angels who love you so. And while you are connecting with your angels, or perhaps better said, your angels are connecting with you, I will also be telling you a bedtime story. Because I believe that there is something beautiful that transpires when we gather together in intentional energy fields filled with divine love. And there's something beautiful about getting to drift off and fall asleep while a loving voice keeps you company, speaking in soft tones and a gentle rhythm. It gives your consciousness a place to focus and makes it easier to drift off. So this episode is going to run about an hour, so you have plenty of time. And if it typically takes you longer than an hour to fall asleep, there are lots of episodes in the archive. So for meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. I absolutely love the work that I get to do in the world. It is such a blessing that life has allowed me to make my heart's work my life's work. And so I offer one-on-one angel sessions. I also offer soul mentoring, which provides for ongoing support as you move through a time of transition or growth or healing. And I also offer a variety of classes designed to inspire your spirit. And I invite you to visit me at my website, illuminatingsouls.com, or at my Facebook page of the same name. And you can learn more about the various ways we can connect. But for now, the angels and I are here to help you rest and hopefully drift off to sleep. It might sound strange to be creating an hour-long episode in hopes that you might not hear all of it because you will be sleeping, but that is the intention of a sleep podcast. And if you don't fall asleep, that's okay too. I have heard from many of you who listen during the day, and the podcast keeps you company. So you also have my blessing if you plan on staying awake the whole time. But also know it's okay if you fall asleep. I promise not to share anything so important that you will feel like you have missed out on something. I have been listening to sleep podcasts for years, and I pick an episode every night from the various sleep podcasts that I listen to, including my own. So this very podcast helps me sleep as well. And I pick an episode and I put my earbuds in. I can sleep with them. They don't bother me. And I queue up an episode, and usually within the first 20 minutes, I'm gone. I also use them in the wee hours of the morning when I have one of those 3 a.m. wake-up calls from the universe and can't go back to sleep. I often will turn to a sleep podcast to listen to because it's preferable than me lying awake being frustrated I can't sleep. looking at the clock every 10 minutes going, yep, still awake. I hate that feeling, so I much prefer to put in a sleep podcast and at least follow along to a story. There's one podcast I will share with you about if you are looking for more material to listen to. It's called The Sleepy Bookshelf. And the woman who narrates it has the sweetest voice, and the production values are fantastic, and they play music softly underneath her narration, and she reads an entire book. It can take, over 30 episodes to get through a book. So she has read Jane Eyre, Pride and Prejudice, Anne of Green Gables, and right now she's in the midst of reading Little Women. And I listened to one of the episodes of Anne of Green Gables last night as I was falling asleep, because I just love that book. As you know, if you've been listening, I've been reading that book to you as well. So I love that sleep podcasts are a thing, and I love getting to make this one for you. It is bringing me so much joy. And I will have you know that this is our 80th episode. Isn't that amazing? 80 episodes. And I'm not at all tired of doing it. I love it. It's absolutely fueling my creative spirit. I love coming into the blanket fort and spending time with you. I love coming into the mystery to see what will be born. I typically have no idea what will be unfolding in the first part of the episode. So each episode has 2 parts. The first part is this one, where I ramble and wax poetic, and I'll be calling the angels in, even though they're already here. And then in the second part, I might read you a story or tell you a story from my own life. And this first part usually runs anywhere between 15 and 20 minutes or so. And then the second part takes up the rest of the hour. And you can always look in the show notes. I will put the timestamp in the show notes of whenever the story begins. So if you ever want to skip right over to the story, you are welcome to do so. So I invite you to get cozy in whatever way works best for you. I'm someone who likes a ton of pillows and blankets, and I snuggle on in and get very comfortable. That's my sleep style. And so whatever works best for you, I invite you to get comfortable and cozy, and invite you to take some nice deep breaths in and out, just letting your body know that it has permission to relax. Just letting the angels bring to you soothing and calming energy for your body, mind, and spirit. And I'm going to call the angels in to be with us. They are already here, but I love the ritual of inviting them in. So beautiful angels on high, I invite you to join us here. And I ask that you infuse this broadcast with waves of love for each of our beloveds here with us now. And angels, I ask that you help to clear our energy fields of any old energies that no longer serve. Help clearing from us anything that is not ours to carry. And helping to clear any old patterns of fear or doubt or not enoughness that truly do not serve our highest good, helping to clear old patterns of stuckness so that we can come into a beautiful sense of freedom. Freedom of our authentic spirit, the freedom of our creativity, helping each one of us deepen in a sense of fulfillment and happiness in the world and in our lives. And so, dear ones, just take a nice deep breath in. Just let the angels do the heavy lifting right now. And imagine, if you will, that the angels are infusing the room that you are in with a soft pink light that carries with it the vibration of divine love. Think of this as a time of clearing out the energetic closet, if you will, so that there's more space for your truth and your vitality and your goodness of light. So just take a deep breath in, and as I speak these words, I feel waves of gratitude flowing through for you. The angels are so deeply grateful for you. You are one of the ways that God's love is expressed in this world. It is not expected that you live a perfect, ascended, enlightened life. We are here living lives of duality, of shadow and light, of good and bad. We all have good days and bad days. There is an ebb and flow and rhythm to life, some of which we can influence and some of which we cannot. And through it all, you are loved. And so as I share these energies, this light with you, I feel the gratitude of the angels for you. You have chosen to be here now, even if it does not feel like it was a choice. You are here, and you are connecting with love. And you have an innate generosity of spirit. How do we know? Because if you didn't, you would not be called to these kinds of broadcasts. These kinds of messages, these kinds of energies typically attract those who are light bearers, those who want to bring more love into this world, those who want to experience more love in this world. So the angels are so deeply grateful for you because these vibrations of love are generous by nature. It's like the pollen of a flower. It goes where it is supposed to go. This love flows to you and pollinates your hopes and your dreams and your authentic spirit. It helps you remember who you are as a beloved child of the universe. It helps you remember that you are made of stars and you are as beautiful as a sunrise, that you are unique in this world. And there are gifts that you carry that you are here to bring and share. I believe this with all my heart and soul. And so I am so grateful for this opportunity to share this love with your soul. As your soul opens up and helps you remember your divine path. So in this moment, receive the waves of gratitude that the angels have for you. It is a blessing to get to love you in this moment. It is a blessing to share this breath and the next one with you. I affirm that inspiration is flowing your way, that beautiful portals of opportunity are opening for you now, and that in the coming days or the coming weeks, sparks of inspiration will find you. Perhaps you discover a class you're guided to take. Or maybe a friend will contact you out of the blue that you haven't seen in a long time, but they bring such joy to your heart. I affirm goodness is flowing to you now. Just take a breath and allow yourself to receive the love, the generosity of spirit, the brightness, and the light that flows to you now. And while you sleep, your angels are going to be with you. And they are going to help you connect with the streams of goodness and light that are here for you. Because you are a big, bright soul. And you have a place in this world. And you are precious. And I am so deeply grateful for this opportunity to share with you this moment in time and space. So just take another breath in, allowing your body to relax even more, going more deeply into the state of restfulness. And while you rest, your angels are going to be with you. And now I'm going to tell you a story. So, tonight, we're going to talk about apples. You might think, but Laurel, how are we going to talk about apples for this long? Or more specifically, how are you going to talk about apples for this long? Well, let me tell you. I had the blessing of facilitating a beautiful class earlier this year called The Power of Your Voice. When a new class flows to me, it comes often as a download, a whoosh of energy, and I try to write it down to get it all down on paper. And that's how Power of Your Voice came to me. And one of the components was storytelling. Because we all have stories to tell. Our whole life is a tapestry of moments and stories. And I didn't quite know how I would teach this. You know, the angels collaborate with me on my classes. And so, in the first class, they had me do something that I found so interesting. It was winter, and so in my fridge, I had oranges. And it's a certain variety of orange that I like called an heirloom. And they said, bring the orange to class. And they had me hold up the orange. It was a Zoom class, and I held up the orange. And this was the invitation they had me issue to everyone. And I said, take a breath and connect with this orange. Look at this orange and begin tracing back in your consciousness your relationship with oranges. Did you like them as a kid? Do you eat them now? Did your mom peel your orange in a certain way and maybe your dad did it differently? just focus on the orange and notice what stories from your life are illuminated. It was such a sweet invitation because I could see everyone coming alive with that prompt. Because we all have experiences with oranges or whatever your fruit is. We all have a lifetime of memories of our feelings about whatever that piece of fruit is. Oranges or apples or bananas, we picked some of the more common fruit. And it illuminates almost a tapestry from our lifetime. It's a fascinating inroad to connect with our stories. And the thing about these stories is they're not the most important stories of our lives. We all sort of have our top 10 moments, right? That moment when life changed. But life is made up of endless ordinary moments, but it is those ordinary moments that often help us build intimacy within ourselves and with each other. So I want to take you through some of my stories about apples, and maybe they'll bring forward some of your stories about apples as well. And because this is a sleep podcast, and my hope is you're going to drift off at some point, if that is your intention, then I can share with you stories about apples. I can share with you stories about anything. Ice cream. I can share with you stories about the day camps I went to as a kid, and where we went swimming and horseback riding. There are these beautiful stories that are part of our lives. And that's one of the things I love so much about this podcast is I get to share these super simple, beautiful moments with you. So this is my ode to my journey with apples. So I'm going to start with my earliest awareness about apples. And this awareness actually is not mine. It was shared with me from my mom. So as most of you know, and if you don't, you will now, I have grown up in a large-sized body since childhood. So much of my life was spent puzzling about the why of it. And, I grew up in the day and age about Weight Watchers and, eat watermelon on Tuesdays. And so this really has been a mystery for my life to unfold of why was I in a bigger body? And why did I have this absolute love affair with food? So this is my first awareness about my relationship with apples given to me through my mom. Over my lifetime, we would have had hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations about food and diet and what was I eating, and we were trying to figure it out. And at some point I asked her, when did this seem to start? Did I always love food? Was I a plump baby? And this is the memory she shared with me. She said, the thing that I remember is when you were little, you always wanted the biggest apple. That if there was a bowl of apples, you wanted the biggest one. And I was somewhere around 2.5, she said, when she recognized this in me. And so I thought, well, that's my first apple story. That I recognized the virtue of a huge, juicy apple, and I wanted the biggest one in the bowl rather than the smallest one. Sounds like me. So that's my first memory, that somehow at a young age, I found the value and the awesomeness and having the biggest, juiciest apple in the bowl. So I started at a young age with my relationship with apples. I also remember that we had two kinds of apple trees in our backyard, as well as a sour cherry tree. Our one apple tree, I think, must have been Jonathan's. They were the round tartar apples, with the tartness. And we also had crab apples, which were more of a nuisance. We didn't eat crab apples or make crab apple jelly or anything with them. We pretty much left the crab apples to the squirrels and the birds. The other apple tree, though, I don't recall eating a lot of them. Again, the birds and the squirrels would nibble on them. And somehow we were worried about worms being in the apples. I don't know if that was really a thing that people had to worry about, but I know that that's something that you always see in kids' books, right? The apple and the worm. And I have found it is not something that I actually worry about much in life, but as a kid we worried about that a lot. So I don't recall that we ate a lot of the apples off the tree. We did eat a ton of the sour cherries, though. But that's a story for a cherry episode if I ever do one. The other thing that I remember about apples in childhood was that we didn't have a lot of variety of apples. I mean, there were Jonathan's and Macintoshes, and then there were the Red Delicious and the Golden Delicious, but nothing like the variety we have these days. And back in the day, my mom shopped at a little local grocery store called the Linwood Market. A very small store, as I recall, a small footprint of a store. They didn't have a lot of variety, and I don't know if big grocery stores were a thing then. This would have been in the 60s. They might have been, but my mom didn't shop there. She went to Linwood, and I will say my mom always had a preference for the smaller stores. Even once the bigger grocery store chains were a common thing in our neighborhood, my mom always liked the small local store because she felt that it was more manageable. And I remember Linwood having a small produce section, so they may have only had 2 or 3 kinds of apples during apple season. And the other thing was, back then, produce was very seasonal. Nowadays, here in the U.S. at least, we get a lot of imported fruit. So we can have different kinds of fruit all the way throughout the year for the most part. But growing up, that wasn't really the case. You ate what was in season, because I don't know that that commercial transportation had become what it is now. So I do remember growing up eating apples. And one of the rites of passage every year was going apple picking. There was a place in Illinois called Wakanda Orchards that was the place to go for apple picking. I just looked it up. The orchard was founded in, I think, 1951 and was going through 2001. And so every year we went to Wakanda. Oh, we just called it Wakanda. And Wakanda's a city, but every time we would say Wakanda, we knew that we were going to the apple orchard. And we would pick a bushel or 2 of apples. I seem to recall that they had Jonathan's or Macintosh. They may have had some other varieties. And the other thing that I remember, again, as somebody who is so fully imprinted with food, I remember how delicious the apple tasted straight from the tree. the apples from the store just didn't taste like that. Maybe it's because they had been picked weeks or months earlier. I don't know. But I remember that each time I got to eat an apple straight off the tree, it was like a revelation. They were so good. So we would eat apples and pick apples and fill up our bushels. And when the bushel was full, you would go and you would check out and pay for it. And they had a store, like a country store, that was part of the orchard. And they had delicious apple cider that they made right on site. They had a cider press so you could see them making the apple cider. And they also had these weird shrunken heads, like granny shrunken heads, that they would make out of dehydrated apples. They were really bizarre. Like the head would be the shrunken apple that would be carved a little bit, and then they would put on a witch's costume or something like that. Like old granny shrunken head apple was a thing. I don't think we ever got one. And there was some kind of food involved, I'm sure, but really the star was eating the apples. And then we would take them home and store the bushel in the basement. I think that was a rite of passage in the Midwest, that for a few months there in the fall and the winter, we would have bushels of apples in the basement. So you go down and grab a couple apples. And at some point, the leftovers would be made into applesauce. I don't remember my mom making apple pie or anything like that. She might have, but I mostly remember that she would make applesauce at some point. And one of the things that I find funny is when the angels, back when we were doing the power of your voice and the storytelling, one of the weeks they had me bring an apple. And I started thinking about how people eat apples differently. There are people who I say are apple anarchists and start eating the apple anywhere, just anywhere. Because I have always been someone who eats my apple methodically. I start in the middle and I eat a row completely around the apple, and then I eat one side and then the other, so that, there is a sense of order about eating an apple. And I've never understood people who just take a bite anywhere and go for it. Like, how do you do that? So I do have a little bit of apple obsession about how an apple is eaten. I will not judge you, though, for your apple eating style, I promise. But I will tell you, I do the middle, and then I do one side, and then I do the other. Or more likely these days, I cut them up. I'm somebody who cuts apples into slices now rather than just eating it, with a big bite. And I will say that my dad also sliced his apple, but he used an apple slicer. So I don't know how many of you have seen it. It cores the apple and slices it into 8 pieces at the same time. So you position the cutter with the core of the apple in the center, and then you press down, and voila, you have 8 slices of apples and the core has been removed. And that was always my dad's preference. And true to form, I would hang about and always ask for a slice of his apple. And what a nice guy. He would always share it with me. My dad would always share with me. He was such a good man. He grew up with a very generous father. It was one of the benefits that I saw about a sliced apple is you can easily share it versus taking a bite of somebody else's apple that they are chewing on when you slice an apple, you get to be very generous about sharing it with others. So these days, I often find it difficult to finish an apple by myself because, insert here, I had bariatric surgery 2 years ago. And so when I slice an apple, I share it with my husband. So I am now somebody who slices apples. So how do you eat your apple? Or do you eat apples? I will also say that I used to be someone who loved Granny Smith and Pippin apples, the really tart varieties. I used to love them. But over the last, maybe 20 years, I can no longer handle tart fruit. So sad. So I almost can feel my stomach starting to hurt when I walk past the Pippins or the Granny Smiths. It's like my body goes, "Nuh-uh, girl. No, 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 no." And I have to keep walking. For a long time, my variety of choice was the Fuji. I think a lot of us became Fuji converts when they hit the market because they were almost always sweet and crunchy. I loathe the mealy apple. I want something that is crisp and sweet. And so I'm really fortunate that there is an amazing grocery store here in the Bay Area called Berkeley Bowl. And it is known for its produce. Its produce department is enormous, and they have a huge variety of everything. So where a regular grocery store might have 3 or 4 varieties of apples, in apple season, Berkeley Bowl will have 20. They get their produce from all over the Bay Area and from all over the country and the world now these days, right? Apples from New Zealand and grapes from Brazil. We get stuff from everywhere now. And one of the cool things I got to experience at Berkeley Bowl, and this happened to me a couple of times, and this was before the pandemic, so where tasting food and things like that at stores was much easier to do. I was at Berkeley Bowl one time, and there were so many apples, and I had no idea what kind I would like. I was looking for something that was sweet and crunchy. And so I asked one of the guys at the produce department, I said, "What apple would you recommend?" And he got so excited. He's like, "Oh, let me let you try some." And he went through a number of variety of apples. And he cut me a slice from each of the apples, and he would describe them to me. He's like, "This one is sweet, and it has a vanilla flavor to it." And then he would give me a slice, and I would taste it. And here in the Bay Area, especially here in Napa, we're known for wine tasting. And I don't drink wine. I don't actually drink alcohol, and so wine tasting has no appeal. But apple tasting, sign me up. And so this lovely gentleman who knew his produce and his apples spent about 10 minutes with me going through different varieties of apples and letting me try them. And I was in heaven. It was awesome. And that's actually when I tasted my first Envy apple. So if you've never tried Envy, ENVY apples, they are delicious and they are my apple of choice. But I have to get them when they are still crisp because they will turn soft fairly quickly. I don't mean like in a day, but if they're on the shelf too long, they will get mealy and soft, and then forget it, I won't eat it. But an Envy apple at its height is delicious. My other apple that I love are opal apples, OPAL. And I first came across those, probably about 2010. And I found them in the grocery store, and I tried one, and it was like a revelation. I was like, this is the best apple I have ever had. And I was facilitating a beautiful group at the time in person, and I bought like a dozen apples with me. I was like, everybody, we need to stop what we're doing right now because I need you to try this apple. And we all ate opal apples together, and it was divine. We were so happy. So my two apples of choice are typically the envy apples and opal apples. And here in my area, typically apple season happens in the fall. We're also known for the Gravenstein. I might not be pronouncing that right, but our area is known for, I think it's Gravenstein apples, which are a little tart but are good for baking. That they come about in the fall here. One of my favorite ways to eat an apple is to cut it up and cube it. So I make it into, I slice it and then I cut it into pieces. And I mix it up with some yogurt and honey and granola or with cottage cheese. And that will be a whole meal for me. So it's one of my favorite ways to eat apples. And right now it is the end of August and I am not eating apples because it is summer fruit season, which is my favorite. So I'm big into the melons right now and grapes and nectarines. As a matter of fact, when I am done recording this, I will be going to the farmer's market today in search of the perfect nectarine. But this is about apples, so I digress. And then, to round out this episode, I thought I would find a book about apples where I could share some more apple wisdom with you. So this is the book, How to Cook Apples, shown in 100 different ways of dressing that fruit, by Georgiana Hill, published in 1865. So we start with quite a flourish as she writes poetically about apples. So we start off with a chapter on apples. In the whole extent of nature's affluence, perhaps no lovelier object can be met with than an apple tree, both in the cheery springtide when covered with bloom, and in the autumn when its boughs are laden with precious fruit, in fragrance and beauty rivaling the rarest exotics, its fragile blossoms opening with winning grace, appear to blush at finding themselves so beautiful, and to feel they are as unprotected as they are fair. But soon a group of lusty leaves springs round to shelter the short-lived flowers, and to shield the tender fruit which in a few short weeks shines in sunnied clusters amongst its glossy guard. Oh, as the summer breeze spreads out the masses of its deep green foliage, all studded over with golden or ruby fruit, it looks like the very oriflamme, I don't know what this word is, oriflamme of horticulture. So forgive me if I have completely mangled that word. Isn't she a wonderful writer? I love this. Dear to us are the kindly fruits and flowers of earth, and grateful indeed ought we to be to those among us who by judicious cultivation add to our stores of these blessings. An apple is the emblem of temptation. In the language of flowers, it blossoms denote preference. In the interpretation of dreams, apples are indicative of joy and gladness. Apples have ever been the, okay, she's writing in French, gage d'armor. Okay, just let's skip over that. Of youth, the guerdon, Guerdon, of good children, and the bribe. I know that word, okay. And the bribe, which changes the tears of babyhood into dimpled smiles. Apples have acted as an important part of the world's great drama. To the agency of one of their species is attributed to the downfall of man. And if we are to believe the story of William Tell, the independence of people once hung upon an apple. Sir Isaac Newton had not so clearly demonstrated the laws of gravity but for the interposition of an apple. And so she goes on to continue to write about apples. And then she says, it is a popular error to imagine that apples are difficult to be digested. A good raw but ripe apple is one of the easiest of vegetable substances for the stomach to deal with, the whole process of digestion being completed in exactly 85 minutes. I wonder how they knew that. Okay, and even an English apple dumpling is perfectly disposed of in as short a period as tender beef, namely in about 180 minutes. Of course, by abuse, anything can be rendered unwholesome. Okay, so I'm going to skip this part. She goes into history. So we'll come to some of her recipes. This one is for apple bread. Weigh 7 pounds of fresh, juicy apples. Peel, core, and boil them to a pulp, being careful to use an enameled saucepan or a stone jar placed inside an ordinary saucepan of boiling water. Otherwise, the fruit becomes discolored. Mix the pulp with 14 pounds of the best flour. Put in the same quantity of yeast you would use in common bread, and use as much water as will make it into a fine, smooth dough. Put it into a pan and stand it in a warm place to rise. Let it remain for 12 hours at least. Form it into a rather long-shaped loaves and bake it in a lively oven. This bread is very much eaten in the south of Europe. Well, with 7 pounds of apples and 14 pounds of flour, that's a lot of loaves, I would imagine. This next recipe is for simple apple pie, and so this book was published in 1865. And so she is assuming that the reader already knows a lot about baking and cooking, because this is the apple pie recipe. Pare, core, and cut up the fruit into thin slices. Lay it in your dish and sprinkle some sugar amongst it. When full, put in the juice of 2 lemons with a little of the rind finely shred and some cinnamon in powder. Line the dish and cover it with a tolerably good crust and bake it for about an hour. Before serving, sift a little sugar over it. So I love this recipe. She assumes we already know how to make a tolerably good crust. I don't know what a tolerably good crust would be, but I love that, she would think that we would already know how to make that. So basically, how to make an apple pie. We'll make a crust and then cut up the apples and put some sugar and cinnamon in it and then bake it. Okay, thanks. Thank you, that helps. We have come so far from these days when people knew how to do these things. Oh, apple fritters. Who doesn't love a good apple fritter? Make a thick batter with 6 well-beaten eggs, a pint of milk, and a little powdered nutmeg, a glass of brandy, and fine flour enough to make it of requisite consistency. Slice some good dressing apples into rounds and dip each piece into the batter, then fry in very hot lard over a quick fire. The lard should smoke before the fritters are put in, otherwise they will not be of good color. How about baked apple pudding? Into a well-buttered pudding basin, put a layer of breadcrumbs, then a layer of apples cut up small, a sprinkling of grocer's currants, and some brown sugar. Repeat this process of breadcrumbs and fruit until the basin is full. Then carefully pour in some melted butter. Finish with a coating of breadcrumbs on the top and bake it for an hour. And this is for plain baked apples. And I remember my mom. Okay, wait, I'm laughing because I just remembered this recipe. It's really not a recipe. My mom used to make baked apples. But back in the day, my mom and I, starting in, I think I was in 7th grade or something, or 7 years old, we would do Weight Watchers. And so this was a Weight Watchers recipe for baked apples. So you take an apple, of course, and you core it. And then you pour like cherry diet soda over it. It had to be diet soda, though, because, of course, it was the late 60s or early 70s. And some cinnamon, and that was your baked apple, because we couldn't have sugar. Oh my God, I can't believe I just remembered that. Another apple story brought to you from the tapestry of my lifeline. Okay, but here is this woman's plain baked apples recipe. I'm sure she doesn't use diet soda because it didn't exist back then. I'm sure she uses sugar, or not. So let's see. Choose some nice sizable apples, rather large. Prick them very well with a coarse needle to prevent their bursting. Lay them nicely in a baking sheet with their stalks upward. As they are beginning to get warm, rub a little butter over each, and when done, serve either warm or cold with the addition of some pounded sugar strewed upon them. No diet soda in sight. So, welcome to my life. All right, this next one is for preserved American apples. And I should say that this book was published in London, so I'm assuming the author was British. So, this is for preserved American apples. When quite ripe, gather the apples and, without depriving them of their stalks, pack them into small but wide-mouthed bottles. Strewn into each bottle 1/2 pound of the best loaf sugar. Cork them very well and place them upside down in a saucepan of cold water. Let them come gradually to a boil and then simmer for 3 hours. The pretty appearance of these apples being their principal attraction, they are preserved chiefly to be used as a decoration to other dishes. Well, there you go. So we're going to complete with this recipe for apple cake, because who does not like a good apple cake? Take 1 pound of pulped apples, 1 pound of flour, 1/2 pound of sugar, 1/2 pound of butter melted, and some powdered cinnamon, 6 eggs well beaten and strained, 2 ounces of candied citron chips, and 4 spoonfuls of ale yeast. Knead it very well, let it rise, put into a mold, and bake it in a quick oven. Some currants may be introduced if desirable, but they must be added after the cake has risen. So there you go, apple cake from 1865. And so, my beautiful friends, thank you for letting me share memories of apples with you. Maybe you have some of your own, some of your favorite apple recipes. I will say, the one thing that I do make out of apples is an apple crisp that my husband loves. It's super easy because I don't do anything that is hard when it comes to cooking. So the way you make my apple crisp is you chop up a bunch of apples. Like you didn't need me for that part, right? A bunch of apples. And some kind of sweetener. See, now I'm teaching you to cook like she did, right? The author of the book. And sweeten it with something. I might use sugar if I'm not going to eat much of it, or otherwise I might use honey or maple syrup or something. I tend not to cook with a ton of sugar. And put in some thickening agent. So I might use cornstarch or flour. And then I often will also put in a bunch of frozen blueberries, because the blueberries and the apples go together really well. And I bake that for a while. And then I make a crumble. And I make the crumble typically out of oats, some brown sugar, a little bit of flour. And I put a bunch of crumble on top of the apples and the blueberries. And then I cook it some more. And that's what we call my apple crisp. And my husband loves it. And as you can tell, it's not much of a recipe because I didn't tell you how many quantities of anything. It's just how I bake. I'm not much of a cook. I'm really lucky I did not have to keep a household running in 1865, because I think I would have been a very crappy person. I really appreciate living in the convenience age of 2022, where I don't have to know how to do these things. But I do love a good apple. So, my friends, I send you the sweetest of dreams. I send you love for a good, expansive rest. I send you joy from my heart to yours, because I am grateful for this opportunity to love upon you. And I send you blessings of goodness and light. So sweet dreams, my beloved friends. I am so grateful for the gift of you. And I look forward to connecting again soon. Thank you.